The call that changed everything. The morning sun poured softly through the glass walls of SundarPichai's office, painting golden lines across the smooth white desk that had seen more decisions than most people make in a lifetime. It was a peaceful morning at Google's headquarters, the kind of day that promised productivity and calm. Yet for Sundar, peace was never a guarantee. He sat quietly sipping his tea, reviewing a proposal about future AI ethics, until his phone vibrated gently, flashing a name that instantly changed the rhythm of his breath. It was his sister Kavya. She rarely called during working hours and never without a reason. Sundar paused, a soft crease forming between his brows. He knew this call wasn't just a casual hello. When he answered, her voice trembled slightly, holding a mixture of hesitation and hope that only a brother could recognize. "Anna," she said softly, using the word that meant brother in their mother tongue. "I need your help." Those words cut through the quiet room like a blade. Sundar straightened, his fingers tightening around the phone. There was something about her tone, gentle, desperate, yet restrained, that made him realize this wasn't about money or favors. This was personal. He listened as she spoke, her voice cracking as she explained. She was in Chennai, working as a teacher in a small government school. One of her students, a 12-year-old girl named Mira, had been expelled from school under circumstances that didn't make sense. The principal accused her of stealing a classmate's expensive phone, but Kavya knew the child too well. Mira was shy, brilliant, and poor, her father a fisherman who barely earned enough to feed the family. The accusation, Kavya said, felt like an injustice rooted in class prejudice. Sundar listened in silence, his heart heavy. He had seen enough of the world to know how easily power could crush those without it. When Kavya's voice broke into a whisper, they called her a thief in front of everyone. Something inside him stirred deeply. He remembered his own childhood in Madurai, the small house with a tin roof, the long walks to school, the feeling of being invisible in a crowd of privilege. "Don't worry," Sundar said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I'll handle this." After the call ended, he sat for a long time, lost in thought. Here he was, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world. Yet his sister's call reminded him that true leadership wasn't measured by market shares or press headlines, but by what you do when faced with injustice that others ignore. He felt a quiet responsibility, one that didn't come from his title but from his humanity. His assistant knocked lightly on the door, reminding him of a meeting with investors, but Sundar waved it off. He couldn't focus on numbers when a young girl's dignity was being torn apart. Instead, he opened his laptop and began searching for the school. The images that appeared were humble: faded blue walls, cracked playground cement, and children in simple uniforms smiling shyly at the camera. He made a decision that would surprise everyone around him. 2 hours later, the entire executive floor was whispering. Sundar had canceled his meetings and booked a flight to India. No one knew why. The staff assumed it was some urgent Google matter, perhaps an AI summit or a political meeting, but he didn't explain. He simply packed a small bag, told his assistant to reschedule everything, and quietly left the building. The next day, the hot air of Chennai wrapped around him as he stepped out of the airport. He had come home countless times before, but this time felt different. There was no official motorcade, no security detail, just Sundar, wearing a plain shirt and carrying a modest backpack, blending into the crowd like an ordinary man. He took a taxi straight to the school where his sister was waiting by the gate. Kavya looked both relieved and anxious as she saw him approach. She hadn't expected him to come himself. "You didn't have to come all the way here," she said softly, her eyes filled with emotion. He smiled faintly. "If something matters to you, it matters to me." They walked together through the narrow hallways of the old building, the sound of children reciting lessons drifting from nearby classrooms. When they reached the principal's office, Sundar noticed a man sitting confidently behind the desk, a man whose expression carried the kind of arrogance that only unchecked authority can produce. "Mr. Sundar, you didn't need to come in person," the principal said with forced politeness when he recognized the visitor. "This is a small issue. A child made a mistake and we took appropriate action." "What mistake?" Sundar asked calmly. The principal leaned back in his chair. "She stole a phone. It's a clear violation. We cannot allow such behavior no matter how poor she is." Sundar's jaw tightened, but his tone remained even. "Did you see her take it?" "No," the principal admitted, his voice suddenly less certain. But the other children said she was near the desk, and she couldn't explain why she was there. So you punished her based on assumptions, Sundar said quietly. The principal shifted uncomfortably. We must maintain discipline. We cannot afford to set a bad example. You mean you can't afford to question your own bias? Sundar replied, his words carrying a quiet strength that filled the room. This isn't discipline. It's humiliation. His sister watched, her heart pounding. She had seen her brother handle boardrooms full of billionaires with calm authority, but here he was, defending a poor child in a dusty office with the same conviction. Then Sundar asked to meet the girl. They found Mira sitting outside the classroom, her small hands clutching her school bag. Her eyes were red from crying. But when she looked up at Sundar, there was a spark of confusion. She didn't know who he was or why he cared. He sat beside her on the bench, lowering himself to her level. Hi, Mira, he said softly. Can I ask you something? She nodded timidly. Did you take the phone? She shook her head quickly, tears welling up again. No, sir. I was cleaning the desk after lunch. I didn't touch anything. Sundar looked into her eyes and he knew instantly that she was telling the truth. He asked to see the classroom. When they entered, he walked slowly around, observing every corner. Then something caught his attention. A loose wooden panel beneath one of the desks. He knelt down, opened it gently, and there it was, the missing phone, wrapped in a handkerchief. The principal's face turned pale. Sundar handed the phone back silently, then looked at the man with quiet disappointment. Sometimes, he said, the truth doesn't hide from us. We just refuse to look in the right place. Outside, the teachers and students had gathered, whispering in disbelief. Word spread quickly that the Google CEO himself had come to the school and proved a little girl innocent. Mira's father arrived soon after, still in his work clothes, smelling of sea salt and worry. When he realized what had happened, tears rolled down his weathered face. He folded his hands before Sundar, but Sundar stopped him gently. Please don't, he said. Just promise me one thing. Never let anyone make your daughter feel small. That night, Sundar sat with his sister on the rooftop of her home, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She looked at him quietly, pride shining in her eyes. You didn't have to do all this, she said softly. You could have just made a call. Sundar smiled faintly. Sometimes the world changes when we show up in person, not with power, but with presence. The sound of temple bells echoed in the distance, mixing with the smell of rain in the humid air. Sundar leaned back, feeling both heavy and alive. But as he looked at the stars, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. The message contained only a few words. Thank you for helping me. But this isn't over. He frowned, staring at the screen. Something about it didn't feel right. Who could have sent that message? As the wind whispered through the night, Sundar realized that what began as a simple act of kindness was about to unfold into something much larger. Something that would test not just his values, but his courage. And that was how it began. The story that would soon make the world question what true power really means. The shadow behind the truth. The next morning began with a strange silence, the kind that carries the weight of something unspoken. Sundar woke up early in his sister's house, the same small home where he had spent part of his youth. The fan above creaked gently as dawn light slipped through the thin curtains, scattering over the old photographs that still hung on the wall. For a man who had built his life among glass towers and boardrooms, these walls whispered of a different time, of humble beginnings and fragile dreams. But that peaceful nostalgia was broken by the memory of the message he had received the night before. Thank you for helping me, but this isn't over. The words replayed in his mind like an unfinished melody, both haunting and curious. He sat quietly at the kitchen table while Kavya prepared tea. The sound of boiling water filled the air, and she noticed his distracted gaze. Something's bothering you, she said softly, setting the cup before him. He nodded, showing her the message on his phone. She read it, her brows knitting in confusion. Maybe it's just someone grateful for what you did yesterday, she suggested, trying to dismiss the unease. But Sundar's instincts, sharpened by years of solving complex problems, told him this was different. Gratitude never came wrapped in mystery. After breakfast, they returned to the school. The morning assembly had already started, and students stood in neat rows, their voices rising in chorus as they sang the national anthem. Mira was among them, her face brighter than before, her small frame standing tall with newfound dignity. Sundar watched her quietly, a gentle smile touching his lips, but not far from her. He noticed a group of teachers whispering in tight circles, glancing toward him with looks that were neither friendly nor neutral. One of them, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes and a clipped mustache, seemed particularly uneasy. Later that day, Sundar learned the man's name, Mr. Raghavan, the vice principal. He was known for his strict discipline and old-school ideas about hierarchy. It was Raghavan who had first accused Meera, insisting to the principal that she was guilty based on intuition. Sundar approached him politely, hoping to understand more, but Raghavan's answers were evasive. His tone carried subtle resentment, as though Sundar's involvement had embarrassed the school's authority. "We've maintained order here for years," Raghavan said stiffly. "People from outside, even someone as respected as you, may not understand how things work in our environment." Sundar's eyes softened, but his words were measured. "Order without fairness isn't order. It's control." The man's expression hardened, yet he said nothing. Sundar could feel the tension in the air, a quiet resistance that spoke of hidden motives. He had seen this kind of power dynamic before, not in schools but in corporations, governments, and even families. Wherever fear replaces fairness, truth becomes the first casualty. As the day went on, Sundar noticed something else unusual. While talking with a few students during recess, he realized that the story about the missing phone wasn't as simple as it seemed. Some of the children whispered that Meera had been targeted before, that she had once corrected Raghavan in class when he mispronounced an English word. Others said she had won a regional essay contest, beating students from wealthier families, which had drawn unwanted attention from certain staff members who disliked seeing a poor girl excel. Each new detail painted a darker picture. It wasn't just about a stolen phone. It was about pride, prejudice, and the quiet cruelty of those who feel threatened by the success of others. That evening, Sundar and Kavya invited Meera and her father to dinner. The small home was filled with laughter and warmth as Kavya cooked their favorite dishes. Meera's father, still overwhelmed by gratitude, kept thanking Sundar, but Sundar simply smiled and said, "I didn't do anything special. I only listened." But halfway through the meal, Meera looked up with hesitant eyes and said, "Sir, there's something I didn't tell anyone." The room fell silent. She clutched her spoon nervously before continuing. "After they found the phone, Mr. Raghavan told me to stay quiet. He said if I spoke about anything, I would be expelled again. He said, this wasn't really about the phone." Sundar's calm expression didn't change, but his pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. "He said someone wanted to send a message to my teacher," Meera said, looking down. "He said she shouldn't question the rules of the school again." Kavya froze, realizing what that meant. She had argued with the administration only a week earlier about the unfair treatment of poor students, especially when they were forced to clean classrooms after hours. She had spoken up in a meeting, and since then, some teachers had begun avoiding her. Sundar leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. The puzzle was beginning to form a shape. Meera had been used, not punished. It was an act of intimidation, an attempt to silence his sister's voice through humiliation of her students. That night, Sundar walked alone through the narrow lanes of the neighborhood. The city around him pulsed with life. Horns, street vendors, the smell of roasted corn. But his thoughts were far away. He wasn't a politician nor a judge, yet he knew that injustice left unanswered grows roots. And sometimes the only way to uproot it is to confront it head-on. The next morning he returned to the school unannounced. This time, he asked to speak to all the teachers together. The room fell quiet when he entered. Even those who didn't know his identity could sense something in his demeanor, a calm authority that didn't need to shout to be heard. "I came here yesterday because a young girl was accused without proof," Sundar began, his voice even. "But I've learned this isn't an isolated case. This is a pattern, where students from poorer families are treated as if they are worth less than others." Several teachers shifted uncomfortably. The principal looked pale. "Education," Sundar continued, "is not a privilege, it's a promise. When we teach children to fear authority instead of believing in themselves, we break that promise." His words hung in the air like a quiet storm. He didn't raise his voice, yet every syllable carried weight. He didn't accuse anyone by name, but his gaze lingered for a moment on Raghavan, who avoided eye contact. "We can't build a better world by teaching children that kindness is weakness," Sundar said finally, "and we can't claim to educate them if we don't first treat them as equals." As he finished, there was a long silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, a young teacher at the back stood up and said softly, "Sir, he's right. This has been happening for years. Her voice shook, but her courage lit a spark. One by one, others began nodding, murmuring agreement. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. But just when Sundar thought the storm was passing, his phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message appeared. This one said, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." For the first time in years, Sundar felt a chill run through him. He had faced competition, politics, even global crises, but never personal threats. Yet something deep inside him told him this was bigger than one school. This was about something hidden in plain sight, something that reached beyond a simple act of prejudice. As he looked around the silent room, he realized one thing. Someone in this very building didn't just dislike what he was doing, they were afraid of it. And that fear meant only one thing. The truth he had stumbled upon was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Beneath the surface of silence, the following morning broke heavy with humidity, the kind of air that felt thick with something unspoken. Sundar stood by the narrow window of his sister's home, watching the early fog lift from the street below. Street vendors were setting up their stalls. Children ran barefoot, and life moved forward as if nothing in the world had changed. But in his heart, Sundar knew everything had. He had spent the night thinking about the message. Those 4 words that refused to leave his mind. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. It wasn't a random threat. It was a warning, one that carried intent. He knew enough about human behavior to recognize when fear hides behind aggression. Someone inside that school had something to lose, and his presence had unsettled their carefully constructed facade. When he entered the school later that morning, a strange tension filled the air. Teachers who had smiled politely the day before now avoided eye contact. Whispers rippled through the corridors like wind moving through dry leaves. Even the students seemed quieter than usual. Sundar's calm steps echoed down the hall. His presence both respected and feared. He wasn't angry. He was observant, and observation was his greatest weapon. His sister met him near the courtyard. Her expression showed concern more than fear. "Anna," she said quietly. "Someone called last night. They didn't speak, but I heard breathing before the line went dead." He looked at her steadily. "Don't worry. This means we're close to the truth." "But what truth?" she asked, frustration breaking through her worry. "This is just a school. Why would anyone go this far to protect a lie?" Sundar smiled faintly, though his eyes remained serious. Sometimes the smallest places hide the biggest secrets. After the assembly ended, Sundar walked through the administrative building. He noticed small details. Old files piled in corners, dusty certificates on the walls, broken locks on storage doors. He knew from experience that corruption often disguised itself in routine. When everything looked neglected, it meant someone wanted it that way. Because neglect was the easiest way to hide mismanagement, he asked the principal if he could see the student records. The man hesitated before agreeing. When Sundar began scanning through the registers, one file stood out. A list of scholarship funds and donation receipts. Something about the numbers didn't add up. Large sums had been marked as used for student welfare, yet no improvements were visible in the classrooms. Even the benches were falling apart. He took a closer look at the signatures on the forms. The principal's name was there, but so was Raghavan's, multiple times attached to cash transactions that didn't have any receipts attached. Sundar felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. This was it. The injustice toward Meera wasn't about discipline or bias. It was about distraction. When people like Raghavan misused funds, they needed chaos to keep attention away from the money trail. Accusing a student, creating scandal, and silencing dissenting voices like Kavya. It was all part of a larger game. Sundar closed the file gently. "This isn't about a phone," he said to himself. "It's about theft, but not the kind they accused that girl of." When he confronted the principal privately, the man's composure cracked slightly. "Sir, I don't understand what you're implying," he stammered. Sundar leaned forward, his voice quiet but unshakable. "You do understand. You just don't expect anyone to question it." The principal's face turned pale. "You can't just come here and accuse us. This is an internal matter." "Corruption is never internal," Sundar replied calmly. "It spreads like infection until it destroys everything it touches." Before the man could respond, Raghavan entered the office. His eyes burned with hostility. "You have no right to interfere," he said sharply. "This is not a Google board meeting. This is our institution, and you're not in charge here." Sundar turned slowly toward him, his tone measured. "You're right. I'm not in charge here. I'm only here because one innocent child suffered while the guilty walked free. I'm here because my sister believes this place can still stand for something good. But tell me, Mr. Raghavan, when was the last time you actually believed that? The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the fan above them seemed to stop spinning. Later that evening, Sundar decided to meet with a local journalist he knew from years ago. A man named Arjun, who had once covered one of Sundar's early technology projects in India. Arjun was known for his integrity and his unwillingness to look away from uncomfortable truths. They met in a small tea shop near Marina Beach. The air smelled of salt and fried snacks, and people passed by without recognizing the quiet CEO seated on the wooden bench. Arjun listened intently as Sundar explained everything: the accusation, the evidence, the threats. When Sundar finished, Arjun leaned back and exhaled. I've heard rumors about this school, he said thoughtfully. They get funding from multiple NGOs and companies every year, but no one knows where the money goes. Last year there was talk of a construction grant that vanished. So this isn't new, Sundar said softly. No, Arjun replied. It's just that no one with power cared enough to look into it. Until now, they agreed to work quietly. Sundar didn't want a public scandal. He wanted justice without spectacle. Arjun promised to gather information discreetly, checking financial records and interviewing former staff members. But as they left the tea shop, Sundar noticed a dark-colored car parked across the street. Two men sat inside, pretending to read newspapers. He didn't need confirmation to know they were watching him. That night he walked along the shoreline, waves crashing softly against the sand. His mind was full of contradictions. He was a man who believed in systems, in progress, in reason. Yet here he was, caught in a story that felt more like a test of conscience than logic. When he returned home, he found Kavya waiting anxiously. There were strangers near the house, she said. They didn't say anything. They just stood across the street and left after a while. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't be afraid. They're just trying to scare us. But deep down he knew it wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was control. Someone wanted to protect the web of corruption at all costs, and he had just stepped into the center of it. Later that night his phone buzzed again. Another message appeared, this time more direct. You don't know what you're getting into. Walk away or others will pay the price. He stared at the words, feeling a cold heaviness in his chest. He knew exactly what others meant. His sister, her students, perhaps even Mira's family. He turned off the phone, his reflection faintly visible in the window glass. Outside, the city lights shimmered, unaware of the quiet war brewing within its streets. And Sundar, the man who had built his reputation on reason and innovation, now found himself at the edge of something raw and human. A battle not of technology or intellect, but of courage and conscience, he whispered to himself, almost like a vow. If truth costs me peace, then let it. Because silence costs far more, and with that, the CEO of one of the world's greatest companies made a silent promise to expose the rot beneath the surface, no matter how deep it ran. But in the shadows beyond the streetlight, someone was already watching, waiting for him to make his next move. The storm that followed the silence the following days unfolded like a long, unbroken dream, half real, half shadow. Sundar moved through the city with quiet precision. Every step deliberate, every action weighed. He had spent his entire career solving complex problems with data and design. But this was different. This was human darkness, messy, unpredictable, and rooted in fear. The corruption he had uncovered inside the school was not just about money. It was about control, about people who believed their small positions gave them power over those with no voice. By now, the whispers around the school had grown louder. Teachers who once dismissed Kavya began approaching her in secret, sharing fragments of what they knew. One confessed that the scholarship funds meant for poor students were diverted into maintenance costs that never existed. Another admitted that they were forced to sign blank forms by Raghavan, under threat of losing their jobs. Sundar collected these details carefully, piece by piece, as if building a map of deceit. Yet the deeper he looked, the darker the pattern became. One afternoon, while reviewing the old accounting books in the principal's office, Sundar found a folder labeled Special Donations. Inside were several pages listing large amounts of money supposedly received from international donors, including Google's own charitable wing. He froze as he read the entries. His name was printed there as a corporate sponsor, attached to donations he had never approved or even heard of. His own identity was being used to legitimize fraud. A heavy silence filled the room as Sundar realized the magnitude of what he was facing. This wasn't just a local scandal. Someone had forged documents using his name and position, knowing it would deter scrutiny. It wasn't just corruption, it was impersonation. And it meant whoever was behind this had influence, maybe even beyond the school's walls. As he closed the file, a low voice spoke from the doorway. "I knew you'd find that," said Raghaven, stepping inside with a slow, deliberate calm. There was no fear in his face now, only a quiet defiance that came from someone who thought he had already won. "You shouldn't have come back here, Mr. Pichai. You think this is about some missing money, but you have no idea what you're walking into." Sundar turned to face him. His expression didn't change, but there was a glint of resolve in his eyes. "Then tell me," he said quietly. "What is it about?" Raghaven gave a faint, mocking smile. "It's about order, about keeping people in their place. Your sister forgot that. She made us look weak, so we reminded her that everyone has a limit. And you used a child to do it?" Sundar's voice was low, steady, but it carried an unmistakable weight. Raghaven shrugged. "You call it cruelty. I call it survival. These people worship power. They follow whoever holds it. It's not about right or wrong, it's about who dares to decide." For a long moment neither man spoke. The sound of distant children reciting lessons filtered faintly through the corridor. Sundar finally stepped closer, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You've confused fear with respect. One day you'll see the difference." Raghaven's expression flickered for the first time, but before he could respond, Kavya entered the room with a stack of files. Her eyes widened when she saw the tension between them. "Anna," she said quickly, "you need to come outside. There's a crowd." When they stepped out, a group of parents had gathered near the school gate. Someone had leaked the story about forged donations to a local journalist, possibly one of the teachers who wanted to expose the truth. Cameras were flashing. Questions were being shouted, and the principal stood trembling under the pressure. Sundar tried to calm the chaos, urging everyone to stay civil, but within minutes, the scene turned hostile. Several men appeared from the side street, shouting that Sundar was lying, that he had come to destroy the school's reputation. They accused him of creating fake stories to defame Indian institutions. It was coordinated. He could see it in their timing, their rehearsed words. They were not parents. They were plants sent to discredit him. Kavya pulled at his arm, frightened. "Anna, please, let's go. This isn't safe." He nodded reluctantly and led her away. But as they reached the road, a black motorcycle roared past, a piece of paper fluttering from the rider's hand. Sundar picked it up. Written in bold handwriting were the words, "You don't listen well." That night, the news channels picked up the story. The headlines were vague but provocative. Local controversy at charity-funded school, CEO allegedly involved in dispute. Sundar's name was everywhere, twisted and sensationalized. Even though the reports didn't accuse him directly, they painted a picture of interference, suggesting that his visit had caused unrest. For the first time, Kavya broke down. "Why are they doing this?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "You tried to help. You did the right thing." Sundar put a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft. "Doing the right thing doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings clarity, and clarity is dangerous to people who live in shadows." He spent the next few days working quietly with Arjun, who was still digging into the financial records. They discovered that the forged donation receipts connected back to a local trust organization that claimed to support underprivileged education. Its founder was a retired government officer named Devendra, a man with powerful friends and a reputation for charitable influence. It was through his trust that the money had been funneled, laundered and written off in false reports. Arjun warned him, "Devendra isn't someone you can expose easily. He's protected. His reach goes beyond this city." Sundar nodded. "Then we'll expose the system that protects him." But that same night, while driving back from a meeting, Sundar noticed a dark car following him through the narrow streets. No matter where he turned, the headlights remained in his mirror. He didn't panic, he simply parked in a crowded area and waited. The car stopped for a moment, then sped away into the night. When he returned home, Kavya was pacing anxiously. Before he could say anything, she handed him a small envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a photo, him sitting at the tea shop with Arjun. Written on the back were the words, "One more step, and your friend disappears next." Sundar felt something inside him shift, not fear, but resolve. For years, he had believed that technology could solve the world's problems, that progress was inevitable if people simply made the right choices. But now he understood something deeper. Real progress begins when someone refuses to look away. He looked up from the photo, his eyes calm but unyielding. "They think threats will silence me," he said quietly. "But they've already lost. Because truth doesn't fear darkness, it exposes it." The next morning the sun rose over Chennai like fire through smoke. And for the first time, Sundar felt not like a CEO or a visitor, but like a man standing at the edge of something far greater than his career. A battle that would demand not intelligence or strategy, but courage, empathy, and faith in what is right. Yet, as he looked out the window, a strange silence filled the air, the kind that comes before a storm. Somewhere deep down, he knew that the next move would not come from him, but from those who had spent years hiding behind lies. And when that move came, it would change everything. The reckoning beneath the rain. The rain came early that morning, falling in heavy sheets over the city as if the sky itself had decided to wash away its secrets. The sound of thunder rolled through the streets of Chennai, echoing between narrow lanes and cracked rooftops. Sundar stood by the window of his sister's small home, his reflection blurred in the glass. Outside, the world looked gray, uncertain and strangely still, like the calm that comes before the final act of a long, unfinished story. For days, he had been gathering evidence quietly. Arjun had risked his safety to dig deeper into the trust's financial records. What they found was staggering. Millions of rupees meant for education and social welfare had been siphoned into fake construction projects, all under Devendra's name. The web was intricate. False receipts, fake donors, and even ghost schools that existed only on paper. It was the kind of corruption that thrived on silence, and for years. It had gone unnoticed because no one dared to question the faces that smiled during charity ceremonies and press photos. But Sundar knew the danger of confronting powerful men who believed they owned the truth. His instincts told him the fight was reaching its breaking point. He felt the weight of something irreversible approaching, like a wave he could no longer stop. That evening he met Arjun again at a small guest house on the city's edge. The lights flickered and the smell of rain seeped through the wooden shutters. Arjun placed a thick folder on the table, filled with copies of bank transfers, signed documents, and photographs of the fake construction sites. "This is enough to bring them down," he said quietly. "But if we publish this, they'll come after us both." Sundar nodded slowly. "They already have," he said, his tone calm but final. "The difference is now we're not alone. Truth has its own kind of army." As they spoke, Sundar's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a call. The number was hidden. He hesitated before answering. A deep, composed voice came through, one that carried authority and coldness in equal measure. "Mr. Pichai," the voice said. "You don't know me, but I know you. I suggest you stop what you're doing. You're trying to expose something that keeps many people employed, many systems running. You'll destroy reputations, institutions, and possibly your own. Walk away while you still can." Sundar's reply was simple. When truth threatens a system, it means the system was built on lies. The line went dead. Arjun looked uneasy. "They're watching us," he said. "Probably tapping our phones, tracking our moves." Sundar leaned back, his gaze fixed on the rain. "Let them," he said softly. "They can't track a conscience." 2 days later, everything began to move quickly. The story broke online first. Anonymous sources leaked documents to several major news outlets. Headlines flooded the internet. Education trust scandal exposed. Millions misused. Within hours, reporters gathered outside the trust's office demanding answers. Devendra appeared on television, denying all accusations, calling the reports politically motivated lies. But the evidence was too detailed to dismiss. Names, dates, signatures, all real, all undeniable. The pressure mounted fast. Protests began outside the school. Parents demanded resignations. Teachers who had once remained silent came forward, and officials started internal inquiries. For the first time, those who had used fear as a shield now faced the fear of exposure. But amidst the chaos, a message arrived on Sundar's phone. Short, chilling, and final. "You've gone too far. We warned you." That night, when Sundar left his sister's house to meet Arjun, he noticed the street unusually quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of storm. Halfway down the road, he saw a figure waiting near the corner. As he approached, the figure stepped forward. It was Raghavan. His clothes were soaked, his eyes sunken with exhaustion, but there was no anger left in him, only resignation. "You were right," he said hoarsely. "They used me. I thought I was protecting order, but I was protecting thieves." Sundar said nothing, letting the man speak. They told me to handle you. Raghavan continued, his voice trembling. But I can't do it anymore. You need to know something before it's too late. They're going to pin everything on your sister. They've already prepared the papers. False witness statements, fake transactions in her name. By morning, she'll be the one they accuse. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sundar felt the air leave his lungs. He stepped closer, his voice low and calm but burning with intensity. Where are those documents? Raghavan hesitated. In the trust's office, in a safe behind Devendra's desk. They'll destroy them after sunrise. Without another word, Sundar turned and ran through the rain-slicked streets. His heart pounded, his mind racing. Every step echoed with one thought. They will not touch her. When he reached the office building, it was dark. The guards gone for the night. He forced the side door open and stepped into the silence. The power was out, and the only light came from the faint glow of his phone. He moved quickly, his footsteps careful but steady. In Devendra's office, the walls were lined with awards and photographs, smiling faces, shaking hands, speeches about hope and education. The irony stung. Sundar found the safe behind a framed certificate. He remembered the combination written on one of the files Arjun had shown him, and began turning the dial slowly. After a tense minute, the lock clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, sealed envelopes, and USB drives. He gathered everything and slipped them into his backpack. But just as he turned to leave, a sound broke the silence, a door creaking open behind him. He froze. A flashlight beam cut across the room. Voices followed. "He's here," someone whispered. Sundar ducked behind the desk as footsteps approached. His pulse raced, but his mind stayed calm. Years of decision-making had taught him one thing. Panic never saves you, focus does. When the men moved closer, he tossed a small metal paperweight toward the opposite corner. It hit the floor with a loud clang, and as they turned toward the sound, he slipped out the back door into the alley, disappearing into the dark. He didn't stop running until he reached the main road. Headlights flashed across his face as he flagged down an auto rickshaw. "Bus station," he said breathlessly. "Now." By dawn, he and Arjun were in a different city, the evidence secured in multiple copies. They sent it to 3 major newspapers and a government oversight agency. Within hours, it was everywhere. Broadcasts, news feeds, even international channels. The scandal exploded, shaking political circles and sparking nationwide outrage. Devendra was arrested that same week. Raghavan turned himself in, confessing publicly to his role and naming others involved. The government ordered a full audit of all charity-funded schools across the region. And amid all the noise, Kavya returned to her classroom, where Meera sat in the front row, her smile once again unburdened. When Sundar finally stood before his sister that evening, she looked at him with eyes full of both gratitude and sadness. "You didn't have to fight this hard," she said quietly. "You could have gone back to your world and no one would have blamed you." He smiled faintly. The world doesn't change when we look away. It changes when someone decides not to. The rain began again, soft this time, falling gently on the rooftops. In that quiet rhythm, Sundar realized that this battle had changed him. He had come to defend a child's dignity, but in doing so, he had rediscovered something deeper, the purpose of power itself. It wasn't to control, to command, or to protect one's image. It was to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. As he looked out at the city lights shimmering through the drizzle, his phone buzzed once more. This time it was a message from an unknown number, but the tone was different. "You don't know me, but because of you, my daughter goes to school again. Thank you." Sundar smiled softly, closing his eyes for a moment. The storm had finally broken, not just outside, but within. And somewhere in the vast rain-soaked silence of the city, the truth had found its voice, and it spoke not in anger or noise, but in quiet, enduring grace.